August 1976. A single poplar tree in the Korean Demilitarized Zone, a stretch of land known as the DMZ, became the center of a standoff between two of the most heavily armed militaries in the world. This is the story of Operation Paul Bunyan, one of the most tense moments of the Cold War. A bizarre yet dangerous conflict over a tree that could have spiraled into full-scale war. In this documentary, we'll explore the background of the DMZ, the events that triggered the crisis, the extraordinary show of force by the United States, and the lessons the world learned from a tree that nearly started a war. To understand Operation Paul Bunyan, we need to go back to the roots of the conflict. The Korean War, fought from 1950 to 1953, ended not with a peace treaty, but with an armistice. This left the Korean peninsula divided, North Korea in the north and South Korea in the south, backed by the United States and its allies. At the heart of this division was the Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ, a 4-kilometer wide strip of land stretching across the peninsula, patrolled by heavily armed soldiers on both sides, bristling with tension. Within the DMZ lay the Joint Security Area, or JSA. This was one of the few places where North and South Korean troops stood literally face to face, separated only by a line of concrete markers. Though called a demilitarized zone, the DMZ was one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Soldiers from both sides patrolled constantly, often glaring at one another, sometimes even exchanging hostile gestures. Any small incident carried the risk of escalation. Inside the JSA stood a large poplar tree. At first glance, it was an ordinary tree, providing shade and greenery in an otherwise tense environment. But the tree had a strategic significance. It obstructed the line of sight between United Nations, command observation posts, and a key checkpoint known as Checkpoint 3. This meant that UN and South Korean soldiers stationed at one post could not see what was happening at the other, a potential security risk. Commanders had requested trimming or cutting the tree multiple times. But in the sensitive atmosphere of the DMZ, even simple tasks required careful coordination. Any action, even as mundane as cutting branches, could be seen as provocation. On August 18, 1976, a team of United Nations command personnel, accompanied by South Korean laborers, entered the JSA to trim the poplar tree. The team was led by U.S. Army Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett. As the team began their work, a group of North Korean soldiers approached, led by Senior Lieutenant Pak Chul, known among U.S. soldiers for his aggressive behavior. Pak Chul demanded that the trimming stop, declaring that the tree had been personally planted and nurtured by North Korea's founding leader, Kim Il-sung. The Americans ignored the demand and continued their task. What happened next became known as the axe murder incident. Tensions escalated rapidly. The North Korean soldiers suddenly attacked the work party, using their own tools, including axes brought for trimming. Captain Boniface and Lieutenant Barrett lost their lives, and several others were injured before the attackers withdrew. This shocking incident shook the United Nations Command, South Korea, and the United States. It was one of the most serious clashes in the DMZ since the Korean War. The attack reverberated far beyond the DMZ. The United Nations immediately condemned the violence. The United States, under President Gerald Ford, faced a difficult choice: how to respond decisively without triggering all-out war. Within hours, emergency meetings were held in Seoul and Washington. Military planners debated options: airstrikes on North Korean targets, a direct assault on the JSA, or a large-scale show of force. Ultimately, the U.S. sought a strategy that would demonstrate overwhelming strength without crossing the threshold into war. The decision was made. They would remove the tree once and for all, in a mission that came to be known as Operation Paul Bunyan. The plan was straightforward in concept, but enormous in scale. The United States would send in engineers to cut down the poplar tree. But unlike the small team attacked days earlier, this operation would be backed by an unprecedented show of military might. On the morning of August 21, 1976, just 3 days after the attack, the mission was set into motion. Two 30-man teams of engineers, armed with chainsaws. A company of South Korean special forces, armed with rifles and visible sidearms. U.S. infantry platoons positioned nearby. Overhead, B-52 strategic bombers flying in formation, escorted by fighter jets. On alert, aircraft carriers, helicopters, and artillery ready to fire. This was not just tree cutting. It was a deliberate message. Any further aggression would be met with overwhelming force. At precisely 7 a.m., Operation Paul Bunyan began. The engineers approached the poplar tree with chainsaws, starting to cut. Around them stood rows of armed soldiers, watching every move. On the northern side, North Korean troops assembled, watching as well. But unlike the attack 3 days earlier, they did not interfere. The sheer display of force was overwhelming. Within 45 minutes, the poplar tree was cut down to a stump. The mission was completed without a single shot fired. Operation Paul Bunyan was a success. The United States had responded firmly, demonstrating resolve without escalating to war. In the days that followed, North Korea expressed regret over the incident, a rare acknowledgement, though carefully worded. For the U.S. and South Korea, the operation restored confidence and deterrence. For North Korea, it was a reminder of the risks of provocation. But the tension in the DMZ never truly disappeared. Operation Paul Bunyan became one of many episodes that illustrated how fragile peace on the Korean Peninsula remains to this day. Looking back, Operation Paul Bunyan is remembered as one of the most extraordinary military shows of force in history. It was, in essence, a carefully choreographed performance, a demonstration of strength designed to prevent further violence. The story also highlights a sobering truth. In regions of high tension, even the smallest disputes over a tree, a line on the map, or a simple misunderstanding can have global consequences. Today, the stump of the poplar tree remains as a reminder of how close the world came to escalation in 1976, and how diplomacy, restraint, and deterrence must always walk hand in hand. This was Operation Paul Bunyan, the tree that nearly started a war. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. We'll see you in the next video.